You must be wounded to become a healer. But suffering alone is not enough. Nearly every human being suffers, and yet very few become healers. The poison and the medicine are the same substance. The wound is not what destroys you. The wound is the doorway. This is the psychology of the wounded healer. Carl Jung is credited with coining the phrase wounded healer, though the term he actually used was wounded physician. For Jung, the wounded healer is an archetype of the self, one of its most widespread features, and lies at the bottom of all genuine healing procedures. The healing does not come from the outside. It does not come from the doctor, the priest, or the therapist. It emerges from the patient's own psyche, in what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who one truly is. The cure must grow naturally out of the wounded individual. One must find the light hidden within the darkness. But here is the difficulty. As long as we feel victimized by our wound, as long as we remain bitter, resentful, seeking only to escape, we remain inescapably bound to it. This is neurotic suffering. It is to be distinguished from the authentic suffering of the which has been purified by acceptance. The wound can destroy you, or it can wake you up. There is no third option. And which of these outcomes occurs depends entirely on what you do with the suffering you did not choose. To understand this archetype, we must descend into the old myths, because the old myths know things about the human soul that our modern psychology is only beginning to remember. In ancient Greece, the god Apollo was a sun-like healer who could cure all ills. But Apollo was also the bringer of disease and death. His arrows carried plague as easily as they carried light. He is what we might call the unwounded healer. He heals from above, from untouchable divinity. He has never bled. He has never lain awake in the dark wondering if the pain would ever end. And precisely because of this, his healing has a certain coldness to it, a certain distance. Apollo raised a centaur named Chiron. Centaurs, as a rule, were wild, drunken, violent, intoxicated by their own animal nature. But Chiron was different. Chiron was wise, just, gentle, and immortal. He became a skilled healer, teaching the great heroes of Greece Achilles, Jason, Hercules, and then, one day, by sheer accident, Chiron was struck by a poisoned arrow. The poison came from the blood of the Hydra, one of the most venomous substances in all of Greek mythology. And here is the cruel twist. Chiron, despite being the greatest healer of his age, could not heal his own wound. He was immortal, so the wound could not kill him. But it could not be cured either. He suffered excruciating pain for the rest of his existence. And it was precisely because of this grievous, unhealable wound that Chiron became known as the legendary healer of ancient Greece. The secret of healing is inside the wound. The wound contains the medicine. True health does not come from the absence of injury. It comes from acceptance of our wounds, from descending into them and discovering what lives at their bottom. Chiron's story has one more turn. The Titan Prometheus, who had stolen fire from the gods and given it to mankind, who had given us consciousness, freeing us from being unconscious puppets of the divine, was being punished horribly for his gift. Chiron, weary of his eternal pain, offered to exchange his immortality for the life of Prometheus. He volunteered to die so that the bringer of consciousness might live. Consciousness is deeply traumatic. It is the most painful gift we have ever received. But it is also the greatest. Zeus, witnessing Chiron's sacrifice, was moved. He placed Chiron among the stars, where he became the constellation Centaurus. Chiron represents the immortal wound, the wound that never fully heals. And at the same time, he is the source of the greatest capacity to heal others. The two are not separate. They are the same thing seen from two different angles. Christ is the biblical version of the same fundamental image. The difference is one of agency. Chiron had no choice. The wound happened to him by accident. Christ volunteered for the role. He could have escaped his suffering. He chose not to. Both are healers. Both are wounded. Both transcend to the heavens at the end. The wounded healer combines both the healthy and the suffering into a single figure, who heals not in spite of his wound, but through it. This is what St. Paul meant by the thorn in his flesh given to him, so that the power of healing would not be confused with his own greatness. Chiron's greatest pupil was Asclepius, who would become the Greek god of healing himself. His story begins in tragedy. His mother was a mortal woman named Coronis, with whom Apollo had, but while she was pregnant with Apollo's child, she betrayed him by sleeping with a mortal man. She was killed for her infidelity. As she lay burning on her funeral pyre, Apollo rescued the unborn child from her womb, cutting him free at the threshold between death and life. Asclepius is born from death. He enters the world already initiated into the mystery he will spend his... Asclepius holds the rod of Asclepius, a single snake entwined around a wooden staff. This remains, to this day, the symbol of medicine across the world. It is not to be confused with the caduceus of Hermes, which has two snakes and often wings, a symbol of commerce. The true symbol of healing, has only one snake. Asclepius became such a proficient healer that he learned to bring mortals back from the dead. He had crossed a line. Hades complained bitterly to Zeus the dead were no longer staying dead. Zeus, angered by Asclepius for transgressing the boundary between humanity and the gods, struck him down with a thunderbolt and sent him to Hades. The healer himself had to die. He had to experience the fate of mortals. Only later was he resurrected and given a place on Mount Olympus. Asclepius is the only god to have experienced death, and this is why he became one of the most beloved deities of the ancient Greek world. He understood. He had been there. In ancient Greece, there were healing temples dedicated to Asclepius, known as Asclepieia. The most famous was at Epidaurus, the most celebrated healing center of the classical world. Pilgrims would travel for weeks to seek a cure there. Upon arrival, they underwent a period of cleansing, a careful diet, ritual baths, purifications of body and soul. Health, cleanliness, and sanitation were all aspects of the goddess Hygieia, one of the daughters of Asclepius, and the origin of our word hygiene. The pilgrims were guided by figures known as the therapeuti of Asclepius. The Greek word therapeut originally meant one who serves the gods, and only later came to mean one who helps a person to heal himself. This is the original meaning of the word therapist. Not one who fixes you, one who serves the divine process unfolding within you. After several days of preparation, the therapeut would lead the patient to a small stone chamber, a sleeping room called the abaton. There was a platform on which the patient could lie down. The doors were closed. And the patient was left alone, in the dark, with his dreams and with the god. This is theurgical work, working with God rather than simply talking about God. The goal was theophany, a personal encounter with the divine. And what occurred, according to thousands of preserved accounts, is one of the most remarkable phenomena in the history of medicine. Patients would dream of Asclepius appearing to them sometimes in human form, applying ointment to afflicted parts of the body, sometimes as a snake or a dog, licking the wound and thus healing it. And in the dormitories of the temple, real snakes slithered freely on the floor. Not venomous ones, the Aesculapian snake, now named in his honor, a gentle serpent that still inhabits parts of Europe today. For the Greeks, the snake was not the symbol of evil it would later become. It was a sacred creature of the underworld, yes, but also a being of wisdom, healing, and resurrection. Because the snake sheds its skin, it was emblematic of the mysterious relationship between death and rebirth. Dogs, too, were associated with the underworld. The three-headed Cerberus stood at its gates, mediating between the living and the dead. After spending the night in the sanctuary, the patient's dream would be recorded. If Asclepius had appeared in the dream, this was understood as the healing event itself. Note the difference between this and the oracle at Delphi, where pilgrims received advice from a priestess speaking on behalf of the god. At Epidaurus, the patient received the vision directly. The healing was not delivered from outside, it was activated from within. In the classical Greek period, the dream was the cure. In later periods, after the dream was recorded, a therapeut would interpret it and prescribe accompanying treatments, visits to the baths, exercises in the gymnasium, herbal preparations. Epidaurus was, without exaggeration, the world's first psychotherapeutic center. The final ritual was a paean, a song of praise to the god, and a sacrifice of a rooster. The rooster, because it crows at dawn, symbolized light overcoming darkness, health overcoming sickness. These methods were known to be highly effective, as is evident from inscriptions still surviving at Epidaurus, describing healings of blindness, paralysis, chronic pain, sometimes through means we would recognize today, sometimes through events that defy explanation. And this brings us to Socrates' enigmatic last words, spoken just before he drank the hemlock. As the poison spread through his limbs, the great philosopher said, "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect it." The most beautiful interpretation is this. Socrates was thanking Asclepius, the only god known to revive the dead, for healing him of the sickness of life by the cure of death. Socrates lives right into his own death. He does not flee it. He receives it as the final medicine. The healing of Asclepius does not promise that there will be no death. The point of healing is to give one time to prepare for death, to attend to the health of our souls, to set our houses in order. Death is the great equalizer, and a culture that has lost its relationship to death is a culture that does not know how to live. Nietzsche wrote with extraordinary force on this. A natural death, he insisted, is not to be mourned but celebrated. Many die too late, and some die too early. The doctrine still sounds strange. Die at the right time. I show you the consummating death. That becomes a goad and a promise to the living. Thus one should learn to die, and there should be no festival where such a dying person does not swear oaths to the living. For Jung, the second half of life, old age, the approach of death is psychologically as important as birth itself. The denial of death only leads to deeper neurosis. To fight against death is to fight against life, because the two are bound together, not opposites, but partners. Just as a young person must learn to live, an old person must learn to die. And for that, one must have a personal myth, an inner story, woven from dreams, intuitions, synchronicities, that gives shape to the ultimate questions. Jung wrote, "While the man who despairs marches toward nothingness, the one who has placed his faith in the archetype follows the tracks of life and lives right into his death." Jung's entire psychology is built on opposites within the human psyche. Light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, life and death. It is the tension between these opposites that gives rise to wholeness, the enantiodromia, the running of one thing into its opposite, which carves the path to the self. There are two phases in a human life. The first, oriented outward, building identity, career, relationships. The second, beginning at midlife, turning inward. Individuation is the marriage of inner and outer, of who we appear to be and who we truly are, and it begins, almost always, with a wound. As Jung wrote, the actual processes of individuation generally begin with a wounding of the personality and the suffering that accompanies it. This initial shock amounts to a sort of call. Although it is not often recognized as such, the wound is the call. We need to release ourselves from what may be the most serious illness of all, the fantasy of a health without wounds, a life without death, a wholeness that has never been broken. The wound is the initiation into the fragmented self. It is the call to adventure that begins the hero's journey. Jung wrote that the hero's main feat is to overcome the monster of darkness, the long-hoped-for triumph of consciousness over the unconscious. When the hero overcomes the monster, he finds the treasure, the elixir of life, one's true feelings, one's unique potential. The hero is the one who conquers the dragon, not the one who is devoured by it. He alone has a genuine claim to self-confidence, for he has faced the dark ground of his self and thereby has gained himself. The call to adventure comes when we are separated from our ordinary comfort and forced into unknown territory. There is almost always a refusal. We resist, we numb ourselves, we explain away the symptoms. The longer we refuse, the more our wounds grow. Going through the wound is a genuine death experience. The old self dies. Only then can a new self, more expansive, more empowered, be born. Mircea Eliade described two existential modes throughout history, the sacred and the profane. The sacred is the realm of the universal, the immortal, the eternal. The profane is the realm of becoming, of constant flux and decay. Religious behavior does not merely commemorate sacred events, it participates in them. Our ancestors interacted directly with the sacred because without it, man is nothing but dust and ashes. But the sacred is not comfortable. It produces mysterium tremendum terror before the awe-inspiring mystery and mysterium fascinans, fascination before the perfect fullness of being. These are numinous experiences. They shake us. They cannot be controlled. Eliade describes shamanic illness as one of the clearest expressions of the wounded healer in archaic societies. The future shaman experiences a profound crisis illness, vision, breakdown that cannot be cured by ordinary means. It is only resolved when the individual takes up the shamanic practices, drumming, chanting, descending into trance. He is then regarded as a shaman by the community and becomes its healer. The primitive magician, the medicine man or shaman, is not only a sick man, he is above all a sick man who has been cured, who has succeeded in curing himself. The shamanic lifeway predates the earliest cities by tens of thousands of years, and a common thread connects shamans across every continent, an awakening to other orders of reality, the opening up of visionary realms. The entrance to this other world occurs through total disruption, a psychological and spiritual death from which the individual returns transformed. The parallels with modern psychotherapy are unmistakable. Psychologically, we all have a compensatory function. A person who lacks self-worth may appear outwardly very confident. A person who fears he is not intelligent may spend decades acquiring vast learning, displaying it at every opportunity. These compensations are part of the persona, the social mask, and they conceal what lies in the shadow. When the overcompensation becomes too extreme, the true wounds are repressed, never faced. The shadow grows darker. Freud observed repetition, compulsion, an unconscious need to repeat traumatic events with the same underlying pattern. The same kind of betrayal, the same kind of disappointment, again and again. Jung understood this differently. The unconscious is trying to heal us by reconstellating these situations, reactivating them, so we might come into a new relationship with the underlying pattern, and finally convert the poison into medicine. This contradiction lives in the Greek word pharmakon, which means both poison and cure. The wounded healer is one who takes his wounds seriously, works with them, and transforms the poison into a gift for others. Jung wrote, "A good half of every treatment that probes at all deeply consists in the doctor's examining himself, for only what he can put right in himself can he hope to put right in the patient. It is his own hurt that gives the measure of his power to heal." This, and nothing else, is the meaning of the Greek myth of the wounded physician. Freud and Jung were both modern wounded healers. Freud spent the last 16 years of his life tormented by cancer of the jaw, undergoing more than 30 surgeries. Jung was on the brink of suicide during his great confrontation with the unconscious. A month before his death, too frail to walk, Jung was driven through his favorite roads, saying goodbye to the countryside he had loved. Despite their suffering, both men continued to write and to practice transmuting their poison into healing potion like true alchemists. In the therapeutic relationship, the patient often projects the image of the healer onto the analyst. When no progress is made, he may become angry, leave, and return. This is transference. The patient may transfer feelings about an abusive father onto the analyst. The analyst, in turn, must be careful not to fall into countertransference, allowing the patient to reactivate his own unresolved wounds. The analyst must not project his damage onto the already damaged. The doctor is effective only when he himself is affected. Only the wounded physician heals. At some point, the patient must realize that the potential for healing resides within himself. The analyst is a psychopomp, a spiritual guide, but only a guide. The patient must deal the final blow to his own dragon. Healing can occur only if the analyst maintains an ongoing relationship with his own unconscious. Otherwise, he risks what Jung called the Asclepius complex, identifying with the healer archetype, believing he has godlike powers, healing from above without a personal relationship. Depth psychology is a dangerous profession. The analyst is forever prone to being infected by the other's wounds, or having his own wounds reopened. The event of our wounding sends us on a journey in search of ourselves. Through our cracks is where the light comes in. Our fragmented self is the doorway into the transpersonal, the infinite wisdom of the self. Some form of destruction is a prerequisite for individuation. It is necessary for the birth of the self. Suffering, when we suffer deeply, we are no longer suffering only from ourselves, we are suffering from the spirit of the age. The microcosm and the macrocosm are one. Through transforming ourselves, we transform the world. We are interdependent parts of a greater, all-embracing whole. To realize this is to undergo an expansion of consciousness. The archetype of the wounded healer symbolizes a consciousness that can hold the seemingly contradictory opposites woundedness and wholeness at one and the same time. To be broken and to be whole. To suffer and to heal. To carry the arrow that will not be removed, and from that same place to bring forth medicine for the world. Jung's final word leaves us where every honest inquiry must end. The greatest and most important problems of life are all in a certain sense insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. The wound does not close. We grow larger around it. And in that growing in the slow, patient, lifelong widening of the soul, around the unhealable place at its center we become, at last, what we were always meant to be. Healers, because we were first wounded.